There is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between radio and bar talk, between commentary and recaps, and it lies between the pit of man's Netflix subscriptions and the summit of his binge-watching ability. This is the dimension of podcasting and the Twilight Zone. These are the Zone-i-Sodes. And now your hosts, Brandon Davis and Scott McFarland.
And hello to all of you out there in podcast world. This is the Front Row Movie Reviews, the podcast for people who actually like movies or TV, which is what we'll be talking about here on this Friday. We're talking about episode 9 of season 1 of the Twilight Zone, called Perchance to Dream, which aired on November 27, 1959 on CBS. And last week we had a special guest with us. Craig McFarland joined us, but now you're just back with the two of us, and
we're not so special.
And I have here with me.
I probably should unmute myself when I do this. Hi, I'm Scott. I host Flashbacks.
We all like titles here at the Front Row. But yeah, this is as we've been talking about. The Twilight Zone is now really starting to hit its stride. We saw last week. Actually, we talked probably the most iconic episode we talked about. But interestingly enough, we were all kind of divided on it. We all agreed it had its flaws, but where we ranked it was interesting. I thought it was, Scott. It was the first time you and I really had a sort of break in our rankings.
Yeah, and I'm still contemplating how I'm going to fix this, because Walking Distance is probably one of the better episodes of the series, and because I didn't want to rate something so high right away, I rated it at an 8, and now I don't know if I rate something above Walking Distance even when it's not above Walking Distance, or do I move Walking Distance? I think I've basically just screwed up my entire rating system in episode 7, or episode 9, so that's where I'm at. Good planning.
Well, maybe at the end of the season we can go back, and once we have a good grasp of what the season looks like, we can re-rank if we have to.
Sounds good to me. I'm going to have to re-rank.
And we can give a definitive, because we'll probably have to give like our top 5 episodes from the season or something like that.
Yeah, we definitely need to do a season recap. That being said, this isn't like a season that we're used to. There's like, I don't know how many episodes there are in a season here, but it's going to be a while before we recap this thing.
Yeah. So just something to look forward to while you're listening to the other bunch of episodes that we've got coming down the pike here. But we've also talked about.
Sorry, there were 36. There were 36 episodes in season 1, and we're on episode 9.
Hey,
just throwing it out there.
We are a fourth of the way done
with season 1.
With season 1. Hey, small goals. It's just
baby steps. Baby steps.
But we've talked about how we really now have come, because the Twilight Zone, by this time that they're shooting episode 9, has already aired. Rod Serling has heard the public reaction, and even though ratings are not huge, critical praise for the show has really started to come in, and the Twilight Zone is really getting its due from television critics at the time. And he's really now starting to go big. He's starting to take more risks. He's starting to use more budget. He's starting to really take a twist on the stories that he's been telling. And this really, for me, Perchance to Dream, this episode, is really one of the more interesting ones that I think we're going to talk about. Scott, what do you think?
This is one that I don't remember seeing.
Really? Yeah.
I'm sure I have probably seen it, because I think I've seen them all. But this was like watching a new episode for me, because I think this is another one where it doesn't show up in syndication that much. That being said, the story interested me because this is a fear that I think everyone had as a kid and may still have, the fact that if I fall in a dream, what happens to me before I wake up? As somebody who has some very lucid dreams, where I have fallen out of bed when I fall from some height, this is something that was really interesting to me. And also, this is something that is used a lot in sci-fi. The idea that what is a dream and how many layers are there? I mean, obviously, the latest film that really did it that everyone saw was Inception.
Yeah.
And then, if you're a Doctor Who fan, the Christmas episode 2 Christmases ago with Santa Claus dealt with the same issue where there was multiple levels of reality, and when you think you're awake, you're not really awake, and so forth and so on. So this is interesting. I also just realized, Brandon, I haven't even told people what the episode was about, but
right, but that's okay.
You're starting to get a hint based on what I'm saying.
That's okay. Go ahead and read your synopsis then.
I mean, I spent a good 2 minutes on this, man. I want to read it. Edward Hall hasn't slept in days. Why? Because he believes if he falls asleep, he will die. You see, Edward has been having a continuing dream where a woman is telling him to leap from a roller coaster to his death. Edward tries to find a way out of his destiny by talking to a psychiatrist. This doesn't work, and Edward leaps to his death from the psychiatrist's window. We then return to the real world, where Edward has died in his sleep on the psychiatrist's couch. It should be noted, a dead man in the office doesn't seem to be an out-of-the-ordinary occurrence for the psychiatrist and his secretary. They handle it pretty freaking well. The end.
They do.
Oh, he's dead. Yeah. What's for lunch?
Yeah. And before we go any farther, let me tell you what Rod has to say at the beginning of this episode. 12 o'clock noon, an ordinary scene, an ordinary city. Lunchtime for thousands of ordinary people. To most of them, this will be a rest, a pleasant break in today's routine. To most but all, to Edward Hall, time is an enemy, and the hour to come is a matter of life and death. So yeah, sets up this episode pretty well. Before we actually get into the meat of the episode and what we think works and doesn't work about it, we've kind of buried the lead a little bit, but what are your initial thoughts about this episode? You told me you hadn't really seen this one, but what were your initial thoughts?
My initial thoughts, kind of what I already said, is that this is a trope in sci-fi that gets used a lot nowadays still, and this is the first time we've seen it. I also like the fact that, again, we joke that Rod's got 4 or 5 different plots that he uses over and over again. This is a different one. This is something he hasn't done yet. And the psychological exploration of what dreams are and are we really awake? Because the one thing that kind of rubs me the wrong way with these kind of stories, and not so much this one, but in general, is they like to play the game at the end of the episode. Oh, he was really asleep the whole time. Well, then how many layers are we talking about here? At the end of the episode, are we seeing what's real? I'm gonna do a little rant about Doctor Who for 1 second. For the 5 people who have watched Doctor Who. In the Christmas episode that I kind of mentioned, where Nick Frost plays Santa Claus, throughout the episode there's a brain-eating aliens that put people to sleep and basically just munch on them in their sleep. And at the very end of the episode, we're led to believe that the episode ends in a positive note and everyone's okay. But then you also see Santa Claus at the end. And I think the writers were like, hey, this is a cute way to end the episode. And then you realize, so is every episode we watch from here on out a fake, not reality? Because you never actually brought them out of reality? So I think I'm just kind of ranting for no apparent reason now. But I think this is one of those where it's a storytelling interest. It's an interesting storytelling usage, but it can lead to a lot more questions than answers. I also like the cinematography in this a lot.
Oh yeah.
I didn't notice this, and a little behind the scenes action here. We did not have a copy of Rod Serling's intro before we started making this episode, so I had to go back to Netflix real quick and watch the first few seconds to write it down. And I realized that you see it when you watch the episode the first time, but it doesn't really click. The episode starts with us having a weird panning look at a tall building where you're coming down the building, and then it cuts over to Edward, who is looking up at the building and looking down. And then watching this at the first, it was just like, okay, he's looking at a tall building. But watching it the second time, it's foreshadowing the end of the episode, because he's basically watching himself fall down the building, or imagining he's falling down the building. So it's a very interesting use of cinematography and foreshadowing. I also like the etherealness of the dream sequences. I'm pretty sure it's just Vaseline on the film, but it does add to a little bit of that. It's an interesting episode, and again, it's fun for me to run into an episode I honestly don't remember.
Yeah, and what I was wondering was that when I was watching it, I thought, this is one I think I've seen before. I remember the actor Richard Conte, but he's been in a lot of different stuff, and I'm like, I might have seen him somewhere else, but I don't know. To me, this episode just felt really, really fresh, and I think it's probably because we've been watching in order, and we haven't seen an episode like this before. So I'm wondering if you would just watch, in the jumble of syndication, if it would feel as fresh to you watching it when compared with other later episodes. But I think because of the progression of the episodes we've been watching, this seems like a really fresh, interesting episode, and so really was a pleasant surprise for me, because this is one I had seen before, but I kind of went into it thinking, it was kind of an average one, but I had a much higher opinion of this episode going out of it this time than I thought I would when I went into it.
That makes sense, and I don't know the answer to that without actually seeing it, but it makes sense that just the way we're watching these for the first time in order like this is probably going to define a little bit of our reaction to it, and not just for this episode, for every episode we're going to watch. We're going to kind of, and we've already kind of done that too. I mean, I have seen themes kind of continue from one episode to the other a couple times. And so this is interesting to see something that's different. And I think we're going to have the same thing happen next week too. So, and we kind of already hit on this as well too. We're kind of in, the train is running full steam ahead these next few episodes, because I think Rod really hit his stride here. But yeah, that's what I got.
Yep. All right. Well, let's get started though, talking about more of the meat of the episode. What works for you in this episode?
Again, I think the ethereal nature of it. I also think the actor who's playing Edward does the manicness well.
He does.
As somebody who, I've been up today since 2 a.m. this morning, so I understand the lack of sleep thing. And as somebody who doesn't sleep much, I feel his pain, and I can see that kind of manicness when you just haven't slept forever. And I also think he has that foreboding fear. He doesn't play it like he's a lunatic, but you can just see in his eyes that he is scared to death, that if I close my eyes, it's kind of like the Freddy Krueger thing. If I close my eyes here, I'm dead. I also I like the ethereal nature of the dream sequences. It's very weird, and I think part of it is cultural. You've got the sideshow Barker, who people our age probably have seen it a couple times in different things, but I can't think of anything in the past 15, 20 years that has used a sideshow Barker in a story like that. So I think for younger people, it will look even more weird. It's extremely sexist. We've got fat ones. We've got skinny ones. We've got one that looks like a cat, which she really doesn't look like a cat.
No.
But she's hot, but she doesn't look like a cat. Yeah. And the other thing, too, I liked about it is how, is it Maya? Is that the name? Because she has two different names. The Catwoman. No relation to Eartha Kitt. But or Michelle Pfeiffer or any of the other ones. But I like how she kind of plays the devil on your shoulder, where she's making him go into the back room because she wants to get nasty with him. She's like, "Hey, let's go ride a roller coaster. I know you're scared of it, but it'll be fun. Come on." She's very much the she's trying to coax him into it. She's like his subconscious saying, "It's okay. You're gonna be fine. Come do things you know you shouldn't do. It's just one hit, man. It's not gonna hurt." And then she says, "Hey, why don't you just jump?" So, and I like how she plays that.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, though, you brought up Nightmare on Elm Street, and some trivia about this episode. Wes Craven, throughout his entire career, has always been asked if this episode is what inspired Nightmare on Elm Street, and he's denied it over the years. But some people feel that in the back of his mind, he'd seen it and used it a little bit.
Well, and since Wes has been dead for a few years, I don't think he's going to stop denying it anytime soon.
Well, yeah, that's true. But yeah, what works for me in the Richard Conte, I think, is really good in this episode because the desperation in his face, and just you can just see just his whole demeanor of I'm over this, not getting any sleep, and just being afraid to die all the time. Mm-hmm. But like you said, the cinematography during the dream sequences, it looks like a dream. I've never dreamt about sideshow carnival markers and cat women, but
you haven't lived, sir. Everyone should dream about Catwoman. Mine was Michelle Pfeiffer. I dreamt about her a lot, but maybe I'm going too far here. Maybe I'm opening myself up too much. But we are talking about an episode that deals with somebody on the psychiatrist's couch, so. Yes. So maybe this is a good time to come clean of my Catwoman dreams. She's never asked me to jump off a roller coaster, perhaps to use her whip, but never to jump off a roller coaster.
But I can't add anything to that. But no, just to give credit to the director Robert Florey, he shoots the dream sequences really well because it feels like a real dream, because when you're in a dream, it feels like reality to you, but when you go back and think about it, there's always something off about it. And it really, because sometimes when you look at dreams in movies or in TV shows and people have dream sequences, you're like, okay, this isn't what a dream would really be like, but this actually felt like you were really in a dream, which I think lends to the authentic, nature of Richard Conte's performance. But yeah, I really like the whole setup of the episode and what and the way it leads to everything at the end, and Maya ending up being the secretary and all of that. I think the episode has a really good. Serling is great at doing those little payoffs at the end of every episode anyway, but I think this one really builds up well, and also just. Like you mentioned, the cultural thing. I think today, carnival sideshows and things like that seem really foreign to us. But in 1959, they were still around, and still, I know of adults who, when they were kids, went to see all these so-called freaks and sideshow places and everything, and those images stay with them forever. Some people can remember seeing, these fat women and these other people who had all these kind of deformities about them or whatever, and so that was still real going on at the time, and so it probably took on an even more freakier meaning then. It's more foreign to us now, but that's sort of another layer about this episode that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
What for you doesn't work in this episode?
I kind of joked about it at the end of my synopsis. The psychiatrist does not work at all. He seems like he is, and the actor is earning a paycheck, and it's a weird way to end that episode because that episode goes dark. I mean, it's a dark episode from the beginning because the man's running from his life figuratively. And at the end, he either is psychologically pushed out of a window or he commits suicide or what have you. And then we just have the psychiatrist saying his heart stopped. He just came in here and he laid on the couch and fell asleep and he died. And then I'm just waiting for him to say, so, who's next on the schedule? I mean, it's... I get you only got a few seconds to play that off, but either cut away as soon as he finds the body, or at least show a little bit of shock, man. You're gonna have to call the police and explain why there's a dead body in your office. So at least look like you're kind of worried about the guy. And it's unfortunate that it happens at the very end of the episode because it's the last thing you see, and so it leaves an impression. But that's the big thing for me.
Yeah, and like you said, Richard Conte is so good and believable that, as opposed to, let's see what the actor's name, John Larch, who plays who apparently his biggest claim to fame is playing the police commissioner in Dirty Harry.
Another guy who is terrible at his job.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, Harry, go out there. Yeah, keep being a cop. You're doing fine. Go.
But yeah, as opposed to Richard Conte's performance, it really does stick out. I do think Suzanne Lloyd does a good job as Maya, although like you said, though, at the end, I think her performance could be a little more interesting too, especially since we'd seen her in the dream sequences and everything. She could have shown a little more humanity at the end, I felt.
Yeah, but I know she can act because she showed it throughout the episode. So I think she's playing off the other guy. Either it was a directorial choice or it was a choice that Mr. Larch made, and she's playing off him. So I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt and say that Larch is the guy who screws up this last scene.
Yeah. So. Although, and like you said, my first thoughts when watching this episode really was Inception, because I remember the movie coming out when I was in college, and I actually went to see it with Jeremy, I remember, and a couple other friends, and it was a movie we went back to see again, and I think I went back to see it twice or whatever. But just the idea of dreams, I think, will always fascinate us. There's always this sort of Freudian feeling that we all have about dreams and things like that fascinate us. So that this episode's timeless just for that thought in particular. But
that's the one thing this episode's missing. It needs this like the wow 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 soundtrack. That's what it was missing.
Yeah,
it needs the Chris Nolan wow wow.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Before we get to our rankings of this episode, though, any final thoughts about the episode?
No, I not the episode in general, but again, it's been said several times. We are really hitting everything here in terms of these episodes. It's amazing to me how quickly Rod and the production staff were able to hit the ground running. I mean, I go back to one of the most enjoyed syndicated shows of all time is probably Star Trek: The Next Generation. I think whether you're a Star Trek fan or not, you probably like TNG. But go back and watch the first 3 seasons of TNG, up until Best of Both Worlds when the Borg show up, and tell me you don't want to gouge your eyeballs out when you watch those episodes, especially season 1 and season 2. And that became one of the most loved shows of all time. Rod is in episode 9, and he's pulling off Walking Distance and Time Enough at Last and The Lonely and now Perchance to Dream. Episode 9. This man, it cannot be said how much of a genius and an artist this man was, and the fact that we get to continue to enjoy his work. Not just this. I recommend you go check out Night Gallery too. This guy, he knew his stuff, and it's really impressive to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we go now into rankings, and I know that we had a discussion about rankings here at the beginning of the episode, but where are you going to place this? I guess for people who are listening to this episode for the first time, and if you are, I think you should probably go back and listen to the first one. But our rankings are as follows. 10 is one of the best episodes of Twilight Zone of all time. And then we go down to 5, which is average. Normally, if you were in school, it would be failing, but it's an average Twilight Zone episode. And we go down to the 1-0 range, which is just terrible. So where would you place this episode, Scott?
I've made an executive decision in my head while we were doing this episode.
Yeah.
I have killed my scale.
Okay.
Because after we talked about Time Enough at Last, and I'm sure people were annoyed as hell that I gave it a 6. But Walking Distance has been the best episode so far, and it's an 8. So now I'm going to say, and I made up the scale to begin with, so I feel I can change it for myself. My scale right now, until further notice, is 1 to 8 for being average. That's what I'm going to go with.
Okay.
Therefore, I'm going to give Perchance the Dream a 7. It is below Walking Distance, but I honestly think this is a more intriguing episode to me than Time Enough at Last. And I know that is sacrilege to many people, but I enjoyed this one more than the previous one.
Okay. Well, I'm still on the 10 scale.
You did not break your scale, sir.
It's because I've been more generous with my rankings. But I still think Walking Distance is the best episode we've seen. Time Enough at Last I gave a 9 because I think despite its flaws, it still holds up and is still one of the benchmarks of Twilight Zone of the series as a whole. For me, Perchance to Dream is just a step down from Time Enough at Last, so I'm going to give it an 8.
Okay. Makes sense to me.
So yeah, so there we are, and keep listening because our scales are.
I have recalibrated. I feel that I'm okay now.
When we get to the end of the season, we'll do a whole show where Craig can put it all on a 10-point scale again. But
and Scott can too.
Scott, I'm sorry. That's the first time I've ever done that.
It's not the first time it's happened, sir. It's okay.
Okay.
Just don't call me Ryan. Don't call me Ryan.
I won't. I've known you guys almost 2 years now, and that's the first time I've done it, so that's pretty good.
My other brother Ryan, that no one knows, just he swore at his recording or his listening device of choice.
Man!
But he knows I'm right.
Okay. Well, as you said, we are on a fantastic run of episodes here coming up, and next week we've got another interesting one to talk.
I am looking forward to talking about Nazis.
A great one, yeah. Is this? Yeah, this is the first time Rod will have dealt with Nazis,
and the first time we're going to deal with a ghost story.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to talking about that. Before we get to our plugs, though, at the end, I will read to you Rod's final words from this episode. They say a dream takes only a second or so, and yet in that second, a man can live a lifetime. He can suffer and die, and who's to say which is the greater reality, the one we know or the one in dreams, between heaven, the sky, the earth, and the Twilight Zone. So, Scott, before we sign off here, why don't you do a little plugging for us?
I'd love to do some plugging,
Sure.
Especially to the Catwoman. Awkward silence. Okay, you can find us at thefrontrowmoviereviews.com. There you'll be able to see all of our episodes of Zone-i-Sodes, Brandon's classics, my flashbacks, Craig's Beyond the Mouse, all of our full disclosures and movie rapid reactions, and all of our specials. One special to check out we just did a few weeks ago. We did a 90s movies bracket with basically kind of aping the NCAA and put together a bracket of 64 90s films and had them clash out, and it was pretty fun. You can also check us out on YouTube, which is potentially where you're watching us here. Wherever you're checking us out, either the audio podcast or on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe and give us a rating or a like. We want to have more people checking us out, and to do that, we need to show up in some search engines, and we can't do that unless we get some ratings. So please help us out with that. And as always, we'd love to hear your feedback. So comment down below, shoot us an email at thefrontrowmoviereviews@gmail.com. However you want to get a hold of us, let us know what we're doing. Let us know how terrible we are, and let us know what your favorite Twilight Zone episode is.
Absolutely. And so as we sign off now for this week, and we're heading into the double digits now. Next week's episode 10.
Woo woo!
So right now, though, for our Zone-i-Sodes, I am Brandon Davis.
And I am Scott McFarlane, not Craig and not Ryan.
Yep, and we will see you on the couch.
Auf Wiedersehen. Don't jump out of any windows.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Zone-i-Sodes. Zone-i-Sodes is a special presentation of the Front Row Movie Reviews podcast. For more information, go to www.thefrontrowmoviereviews.com.